Commissioner, can you speak to the importance of the pollution cap when it comes to reducing greenhouse gas emissions in the oil and gas sector? And do you believe that government is achieving the right balance when it comes to incentivizing emissions reductions and requiring them through regulations?
So, as I indicated earlier, the oil and gas sector is the largest emitter in Canada, and measures are needed to bend that curve. We know that it's possible to increase production and decrease emissions over time in another sector, the electricity sector, and we've seen good results there. So I agree that measures are needed to bring the curve down on oil and gas. The choice of measures is up to the government in terms of which measures it will use to do that. But it is necessary to bring down that sector's emissions, its total emissions, if we're going to have any hope of meeting the 2030 target.
Thank you. In your opening statement, you indicated that the time of our 2021 report, you noted that implementing the measures then in a place was expected to yield reductions of 36% by 2030. What has changed since then for both the negative and positive?
Yes, so in 2021, we indicated that taken together, full implementation of the actions and measures are expected to yield reductions of 36% below 2005 levels by 2030. And we also noted that that the emphasis this time should be on meeting the targets and not just making plans. Sound plans are essential, but it is the outcome that really matters, which has been a theme of many of my comments today and in previous. So what's changed? Unfortunately, the 36% hasn't changed, although it actually has. There have been different estimations between now and then. It's gone down to 34.6 and back up to 36%. But the gap remains, and that's unfortunate. Some new measures have been brought into place, or at least are planned to be brought into place, such as the oil and gas emissions cap, electricity regulations, the finalization of the clean fuel regulations. But none of the ones that are in place are enough to fully fill that 4% gap. And my understanding of that the oil emissions cap, at least in the narrative that was associated with the draft regulation that was published, it on its own isn't enough to fill the 4% gap, but it would contribute to filling that gap.
Thank you. And since 2019, when most of our emissions reduction policies began to take effect, we have made significant progress in reducing Canada's emissions. This actually shows the difference that can be made when government takes serious action to reduce emissions. When we look at the comparable G7 nations over that time frame since 2019, can you confirm that Canada's emissions have actually declined faster than some other G7 peers, including Japan, the United States, and Italy?
Yes, so we use the two baselines in our exhibit in this year's report and last year's report of 1990 and 2005, 1990 being the baseline year for the UN Convention and 2005 being the baseline year for Canada's current NDC for the 2030 target. But if you look at more recent data, essentially if you put in another graph here for just the last few years, you will see a drop in Canada, and it's not as bad relative to the other G7 countries as it is if you look at these two baseline years. But that's partly not that surprising because many of those countries made deep reductions already, so they're now at the point where it's difficult to do further reductions. Canada didn't do any reductions since 1990. Its emissions are up, so it still has the ability to bring it down, more of an ability to bring it down in absolute terms than some of those other countries. But I would have to look at the various factors involved to see exactly why there's been changes. But the long and the short of it is, we're only down by around 7 or 8% since the 2005 level. We've got to get to 40% to 45% in just 6 years, so there's a long way to go.
Merci. Alors